Mr. Mayor, members of council, appreciate the opportunity to come before you and present our proposed 2015 state and federal legislative agenda. For starters, this agenda was put together in consultation with staff as well as members of council. First, we're going to focus on the state. As you know, the state legislature convenes next week, January 14th. All right, the first item on the agenda is support reinstatement of film industry and historic preservation tax credits programs. Obviously, council, as you know, both of these are uniquely vital to the economy here in Wilmington, as well as the region and across the state. And unfortunately, as I stand before you, both of these programs are either fully eliminated or decimated. The historic preservation tax credit sunsetted at the end of last year, and so we are fully without a historic preservation tax credit in the state of North Carolina. And the film industry tax credit has gone from what was over $61 million in tax credits doled out in 2013 to only a $10 million cap on a grant. In 2014 was expected to be a much heavier year in film industry spending. So the historic preservation tax credit, that's 2,200 jobs across the state, $124.5 million annually contributed to the economy. And the direct in-state film spending just for the first half of last year was $268 million. The next item is support full funding of state economic development tools and incentive programs. These are programs such as JDIG, JMAC, One NC Fund. These are what the state calls closing funds. If an industry or business is looking to relocate to the state, these are the essential funds and programs we use to lure this industry and these jobs to the state of North Carolina. Right now, every single one of these programs is either maxed out or approaching their cap, and it's going to take an appropriation from the General Assembly. Recently, just this week actually, the governor said this is priority number one for the legislature in the first few weeks. You may have read in the paper today that there was a major auto plant that the state was looking at, and they chose Georgia over North Carolina. And based on what I read, that a big component of the reason they chose Georgia was the fact that we had a lack of incentives to offer. Next issue, support replacing revenue loss to municipalities stemming from repeal of privilege license tax. As council is familiar with, the General Assembly last year repealed local government's ability to charge a privilege license tax to businesses effective July 2015. Across the state, it was an impact to local government's budget of at least $62 million. Some would argue much, much higher than that. And in the city of Wilmington, it affected our budget around $2.3 million. Obviously, that's not just a budget deficit of $2.3 million. Ultimately, as you know better than I do, that could impact the city's ability to provide services. Going forward, what the discussion most likely will be around is whether or not there's going to be a replacement revenue option that's going to be provided by the General Assembly to local governments. The question then is in what form that replacement revenue option will be, and to what extent will it actually replace what has been lost previously. Next two items, oppose modifications to room occupancy tax distribution formula. Oppose legislation that undermines local government authority and revenue generation, and that particular item is in response to a lot of the rumors that we've heard circulating about what's going to be proposed in the coming session by the General Assembly that may affect local government revenues. Next item, support prioritization and funding for local transportation and infrastructure projects and explore new revenue sources to address growing needs of state. Obviously, that would include funding for public transportation, funding for port maintenance, beach renourishment, inlet maintenance. But a major debate on this particular issue will surround exactly how these types of efforts would be paid for. I know that some have talked about an increase in the gas tax, some have talked about a public-private partnership fee system, and the governor has proposed a $1 billion bond to pay for some of these projects. And obviously, through all of this, there's going to be a divide between legislators who represent more urban communities and those that represent more rural communities. And so that's obviously going to play itself out this coming session. Next, these are two items that came from the Wilmington Police Department as well as Fire Department, the first of which is a repeat item that was on our agenda last session. Strengthen penalties for violations of concealed carry weapons and felons with firearm laws. Next is support changes to state allowable use policies for first responders' use of utility vehicles and all-terrain vehicles. And where that would come into play here in the city of Wilmington, for instance, is the gator that the city of Wilmington Police Department has. They would be able to use that for the first time on open streets, as an example, patrolling the riverfront. Right now, you're only allowed to use these types of vehicles, and this, by the way, would only apply to first responders. But right now, you're only able to use these vehicles on closed streets. Next, support efforts to increase equity in property insurance rate making process. Support full funding for affordable housing programs. Support legislation creating an independent redistricting commission. And lastly, on the state legislative agenda, support legislative agenda of both the North Carolina League of Municipalities and North Carolina Metropolitan Mayors Association. And I'm sure as you are familiar with, these are two groups that advocate on behalf of local governments. And oftentimes their formal agenda overlaps the agenda that we have here in Wilmington. All right, next is the federal legislative agenda. These are much more broad topics that give the city flexibility to respond to whatever issues may arise in Congress this coming year. Congress formally convened on January 3rd. New members were sworn in today. As I know you're familiar with, we have a new U.S. Senator Tom Tillis, and we have a new U.S. Congressman David Rouser, who will represent a majority of New Hanover County. The first issue is support jobs and infrastructure funding. Number two is support passage of a comprehensive transportation bill and seek investment in regional transportation priorities. As on the state level, the issue with transportation, everyone pretty much is in agreement that we do need a comprehensive transportation bill. Again, like on the state level, it's the issue of how are we going to pay for it. Most recently, the incoming Transportation Committee Chair, Senator John Thune of South Dakota, even expressed an interest in raising the federal gas tax. So I think all options are on the table on that, and certainly any adequate transportation bill would include funding for public transportation. Next item is support sustainability and economic development funding, support affordable housing and historic preservation funding, support public safety programs and related resources. Next is support marketplace fairness, and as you probably know, the marketplace fairness, would be a law that would grant states the authority to force online retailers to collect sales tax at point of sale, similar to as we do with traditional retailers, and obviously that sales tax would eventually benefit local governments as well. It's estimated that in North Carolina alone, we lose out on $214 million of revenue that should be collected from online retailers. And, you know, beyond revenue, it's an issue of fairness to our traditional retailers that are located here in Wilmington. There's certainly an unfair advantage for online retailers relative to traditional brick and mortar mom and pop shops, that they don't have to collect sales tax, and obviously makes their merchandise or their services cheaper than what can be offered if you go just down the street here. All right, and lastly, support public housing authorities to apply for community transformation and neighborhood revitalization grants, such as choice neighborhoods and other related grants without local government co-applicancy requirements. And this is an issue that arose just recently as we are seeing it with difficulty with the Wilmington Housing Authority to be able to apply for the choice neighborhood grant that they've been pursuing for several years, and the requirement that a local government entity serve as a co-applicant at least. And with that, staff recommends passage of this resolution. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.